My presentation is going to talk about the 5 keys to success with open hybrid cloud. Now, this is a kind of a two-way conversation, the way I wanted to structure it. The first part is really about me here sharing our experiences as Red Hat, the experiences that I've had working with customers on where they are with their hybrid cloud journey, what are some of the things that are working for them. But it's also the second part of the conversation is really to hear back from you so that we can, we don't pretend, I don't think, at Red Hat to have all of the answers, but we need to know what the right questions are. And I think the questions come from people like yourselves, the smart people in the room who really are working with this stuff on a day-to-day basis, who can provide that feedback back to Red Hat so that we can continuously improve. So there are 3 parts to the presentation that I had today. I just wanted to set the context. Why are we talking about hybrid cloud? Then I want to delve into the 5 success factors, like I like to call them. And then finally, why Red Hat and what Red Hat can help you on your hybrid cloud journey. So who am I and why am I standing here in front of you? I'm a solution architect, part of the Cloud Platforms team. So I'm based in Melbourne. So it's fantastic that we're having Red Hat Forum in Melbourne this year. It usually happens in Sydney. So it's really a testament to so many of the customer engagements that we have going in Melbourne and the wider South region. I'm based in Melbourne. The office is literally across the street at 120 Collins. My critical function, or the one thing that I have to do really, is to help customers on their hybrid cloud journey from an architecture perspective. So what that means is compute, storage, networking, management, automation. I'm the one who fields the pointy questions first, and then I take it back to a whole team of experts internally and try to come up with answers. I'm very fortunate in that I have exposure across telecommunications customers, government customers, financial service customers. So I get to see a whole range of use cases, which is something quite interesting because you can see what the similarities are. And a lot of that came out with the booth interactions this morning versus what are some of the bespoke requirements for each of these different verticals. That's my email address. That's my LinkedIn. I don't use any other sort of social media. I'm not that interesting that you should follow me on Twitter. I apologize if you had any plans to do so. Just drop me an email. Happy to have a chat. And if you're wondering what my surname, which is a bit of a mouthful, is all about, I'm of Indian background. So Sach means true, and Anand means happiness. What that means is that I'm always happy and I'm always smiling. And even if I don't want to be, I'm kind of forced to do it because it's in my name. So, hybrid cloud. What is hybrid cloud? Why is everybody talking about this all of a sudden, right? And it enters like mainstream attention when there's a Dilbert cartoon about it, and Dilbert's pointy-head boss is talking about hybrid cloud as well. So Red Hat has been talking about hybrid cloud for quite a while now. I would argue, almost 4 to 5 years, right at the very get-go, when everyone was saying it's all going to be public cloud and that's the only way to go, and all of the on-prem stuff is just going to disappear. What we found is that that's actually not the case, right? There's still a very large estate on-prem, and we need to find a way to integrate that, and I'm going to talk about some of those things. But before I do that, I want to level set, because I think sometimes as technologists, we lose the big picture of what is it that we're trying to do. So what hybrid cloud is just a technology tool. It's just an implementation. What is the business problem that you're trying to solve? What is the objective that you're trying to achieve, right? So let's try and understand that. And the way I want to do it today, rather than giving you graphs and other things, which are later on in my presentation, by the way, but it's about introducing you to somebody by the name of Annie, who I completely made up. But Annie is like one of us. She has interactions with her bank. She has interactions with her retail establishment, where she does her shopping. She has interactions with her telco. What we find when we talk to a lot of our customers across all of these different segments is that people like Annie, who our customers are trying to service, have common requirements. These are on-demand service, so we're able to access services that the businesses provide 24/7, 365 days a year. Annie's a busy person. She could want to do her shopping at 10 p.m. at night. Annie wants what I call a delightful, personalized interaction. The application should be fast. It should respond. It should provide her recommendations. It should generally make her feel good about herself. And there's a lot that goes into user experience. And Annie needs secure access from anywhere. So Annie is going to share a lot of information about herself with you as your business. You need to be able to treat that information securely, credit card information, so on and so forth. So all of these things, these are kind of the main building blocks. There are several others, but kind of these are the main things that keep coming up, every now and then. And if you really summarize this in a business context, it's about like pulling together what is desirable from a human point of view, that is from Annie's point of view, with what is technologically feasible, but also what is economically viable. So there has to be some kind of balance in order to meet Annie's requirements, depending on where you are in the business. So to meet or to exceed Annie's expectations, what we believe at Red Hat is that businesses require software expertise. Right? Software today plays a big part in keeping Annie happy. So if gone are the days of, if you've seen the show, The IT Crowd, there's two guys sitting in a basement at the lower floor, and somebody calls up and it's like, have you restarted your computer? I think we've moved on from that, right? We need software engineers in the room working with product people to actually design something that's really good. And we believe that software expertise thrives in a hybrid world scenario, because you can actually use all of these different capabilities across all of these different platforms to come up with something special. So let's talk about what those 5 keys are, or the 5 keys as we have experienced so far. The first one is the choice of cloud platforms, not just for today, but also for tomorrow. And I understand technology changes, things change, so it's very difficult to predict. But you need to have some kind of 12 to 18-month forward-looking strategy. And we're very fortunate at Red Hat Forum. We have AWS, IBM, Microsoft, partners, big public cloud players who are here at Red Hat Forum today. We also have other solutions which we work with certain customers for on-prem cloud platforms, things like OpenStack. And if you extend that cloud definition a little bit, you can also use things like traditional virtualization, like Red Hat virtualization, or vSphere type deployments as well. So the good news is that conversation has moved past, are you going to do one or the other? Most of the customers we know through this RightScale survey are going to have a multi-cloud strategy. Now, I'm using multi-cloud and hybrid cloud interchangeably over here. There are some subtle differences, but for the purposes of this report, it was kind of one and the same. The conversation now, what we are finding in the market is, changing market conditions. I've had a customer who I've had a conversation with, and they've said, my favorite cloud provider of choice, their parent organization, is now going to start competing with my business. They're going to start selling consumer goods. They could start selling phone subscriptions. They could start selling travel insurance. What do I do? How do I pivot? Right? I need a strategy now in place where if I go all in with one provider, that's not necessarily a good thing. I need a way to move across, because businesses may change. You don't know. Regulation may change. Government may bring in new regulation. You need to have some kind of plan. You need to start thinking about those things. The second thing is new pricing models, right? Where you traditionally go, there's lots of stories about bill shock and people getting a jolt when they get their monthly bill. But there's also things like pricing models where if I have an enterprise licensing agreement with a particular vendor, and they allow me to use service credits in a public cloud, how can I use that to consume some of Red Hat's products and services? Or Red Hat subscriptions, rather. How can I do that, right? So it's a different pricing model, very different from I'm just going to pay for what I use. They need bundles together. And the third one is, change of IT strategy. So this is an interesting one, right? Where if you talk to people like business leaders who talk about, digital transformation and agile and DevOps and what have you, if you look at it at the crux of it, a lot of it has to do with bringing people together, work more closely in teams. So where traditionally you would think, I'm just going to outsource this to somebody else, that strategy may now need to change. You may have to bring that capability in-house. I've worked with customers who are bringing a lot of, for example, network management stuff back in-house because they just think they can use tools like Ansible so much better to manage all of their devices, right? Whereas traditionally they would have just outsourced it to somebody else. So this is, very interesting in the world that we live in, because we've moved past that to multi-cloud or not conversation. And what we believe is that a successful hybrid cloud gives you, the customer, choice and control on what to choose, what not to choose. Am I able to pivot? Am I not able to pivot? The moment you get stuck to one particular solution, you have a much higher chance of landing yourself into trouble. That's why Red Hat uses open hybrid cloud. The open word over there is the operative word, because we believe that the customer should have that capability on when they want to move, depending on how the market changes. The other thing that is becoming a reality is, all of these. If you look at all of these different cloud platforms that you have available today, when you're making a choice on what to use, you'll kind of go through a checklist and look at about 7 different aspects of it, broadly speaking. There are many more, and I've left the commercials out. That has definitely a big part to play, but I've left that out for the moment. I'm just talking about technical capability here. So what we also believe is that a successful hybrid cloud enables you to achieve consistency across all of these different environments. I've had a number of conversations just this morning with customers saying, I've gone all in with one cloud provider, and my developers use those APIs to do all of their development work and to consume that provider. Here comes another provider. I've got to rewrite a large part of what I've done, to match this other provider. Go forward, there's a third provider and a fourth provider. So if you're reinventing the wheel every time, and if you're having separate deployments every time, and there's no uniform way or consistent way of consuming all of these different cloud platforms, sooner or later, this is going to get very expensive and very cumbersome. You're going to hit that problem, and we've seen customers hitting that problem. Right? So we believe having a consistent way to consume APIs, for example, is something that you should consider. A consistent way to automate, a consistent way to patch VMs, these kinds of things. The second thing is, enterprise applications need multiple strategies. I was talking to somebody about this in the booth earlier, and I said, you need to have multiple strategies depending on what your application is. And the guy looked at me and he said, what are you talking about? I'm going to KubeCon next month. Everything is cloud native. I want Istio. Service mesh is the thing to do. And I said, OK. Well, maybe that's the case for your company. It may be a startup. It may be something small. But a large number of enterprise customers that we work with, when they look at hybrid cloud, they are looking at multiple execution venues. So bare metal, virtual machine, containers, serverless. They want all of these capabilities, and they want their developer teams and the operations team to consume all of these capabilities. And the applications that sit on top of that, they need to have multiple strategies. So for example, your legacy applications. I don't personally like to use the word legacy. I prefer battle-hardened, well-tested, proven applications that are actually out there running. Anybody who's run this stuff in production will probably agree with me. But you need a way to connect this back into your hybrid cloud environment, right? So how am I going to do things like middleware? How am I going to do things like automation? How am I going to do things like management, right? These things are difficult to change, but how am I going to find a way to plug into that? Modernize business-critical applications. We do a lot of work with customers around this. This is kind of common sense. Pick the low-hanging fruit, go with it, modernize, and then all of the new stuff, if you can develop it in a cloud-native manner, then so be it. Go ahead on that path. But the point I'm trying to make is it's not all about what's on the right-hand side. You need to find a strategy to get all of these different pieces to work together, because for the foreseeable future, you're going to have that in your network. Enterprise apps in an edge computing world. Now, people have been talking about edge computing for a while, right? But these are some of the use cases that I'm actually seeing customers talk about. Things like the connected tractor, to help our farmers. Things like climate change have a big impact. How can we use better, smarter harvesting techniques? Things like healthcare applications. How can I use low latency applications? There's a lot of the stuff that comes into play with the 5G use cases, but there's a bit of an overlap. How am I going to use, perhaps controversially, things like video analytics, from a government perspective, to maintain law and order? That's the picture on the right-hand side you can see over there. So there's a bunch of different use cases, and if you are developing these use cases, if you're a solution provider, a customer, a partner, today you have the option of where you want to actually deploy that workload. But when you have that option, there's a bunch of things that come along with it. How am I going to lifecycle this? How am I going to orchestrate it? Is it secure? What is the security model? This edge piece, from our perspective, ultimately needs to tie back into your cloud strategy, or hybrid cloud strategy somehow, right? And it's important to get this really early if you are planning to use these applications. The third part is, the third key to success, rather, is workload portability. Now, when you think about workloads, there are two, or workload portability, rather. there are two things that I want to touch on. The first thing is, moving a workload from one cloud platform to another in the least disruptive manner, right? And secondly, once you've moved it, integrating that workload with other workloads that you've got running in different parts of your hybrid cloud environment. So how are you going to do that? But when we talk about workload, from a Red Hat perspective, what we like to bring to customers' attention is what is inside your workload actually matters. And I want to demonstrate that to you with an example. Right? So if you look at it, this is your application, and this is the 10,000-foot view. So the techies in the room, please stop throwing things at me, or don't throw things at me if you were planning to. Right? So this is your application. It has your code. This is your business's secret sauce. This is what keeps Annie, who I mentioned earlier, happy. Then you'll have an integration component in there, which will talk to all of the different other applications in your hybrid cloud environment, because no application generally works in isolation. And then you've got your platform, which is what on all of this stuff runs. So this could be a container image, or it could be a guest operating system if you're doing virtual machines. Now, in our experience, people tend to pay a lot of attention to the code and the integration pieces. The platform piece becomes a bit of an afterthought. And typically what you hear is, it's for free, I'll just download it, who cares? And then you say, well, what about patching? What about compliance? Is this that you're using as part of your application, who's certifying this? Sometimes you hear things like, I don't really care, it's not my problem. Right? Well, it is your problem because it's your business's problem, and it's going to become a problem. And the way I like to sometimes talk to customers about this is by using this picture. So I'm a cycling enthusiast, and if you ask me, what does it mean by being a cycling enthusiast? A large part of it is sitting down on the couch with a beer in your hand and watching the Tour de France rather than being on a bike and actually going out for a ride. But, to each their own. So if I tie this back to what your application looks like, that code is the rider. That's the person who's continuously improving, is the well-oiled machine, that's the intelligence, that's the brains behind what's running. That integration piece is the earpiece that he's using to communicate with other riders, get instructions from his coach, so that that unit knows what's going on with the other teams, and they cohesively work together. The platform is the bike that the rider is riding. Now, if you tell me, if you're in a race, and if this analogy rings true with you, are you going to just rely on something that is completely unsupported when you're competing at this level? Chances are you're not. You're going to rely on a partner, or you're going to need something that's fully supported, that's well-engineered, something that you are confident of putting in your production network so that you can compete against other people out there. Right? And to be fair, we've got a lot of feedback from developers in the community about this. Things like, well, it's not so easy to consume Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I'm just going to get started with CentOS. Fair point. For a vast number of developers, that has been a challenge. But we're making changes as Red Hat, to improve that experience. So things like universal base image, right, with RHEL 8, if you haven't heard about that. Things like CentOS streams, which we recently announced. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. Where if you look at Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the way it's developed today is you have Fedora, which is the upstream community version, that gets downstreamed by Red Hat, and it becomes, it gets hardened, tested, and that becomes Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and then we downstream further, or upstream, depending on how you look at it, and that becomes CentOS. Right? So when a developer gets involved, they're using CentOS, which means that they have had little to say with the way RHEL has been engineered. So what we've done is we've said, all right, we need to have something called CentOS streams, which basically means Fedora, CentOS streams, RHEL, and CentOS. So what that means is a developer can use, or an ecosystem partner for that matter, can use CentOS streams and really develop that application so that they're having more of a say of what they will see in Red Hat Enterprise Linux down the line. Right? Things like code-ready containers, where you can spin up a mini OpenShift environment on your laptop. There's a lot of things that we're bringing to the market, and come talk to us in the booth if you want to understand some of these capabilities better. So just to summarize here, right, a consistent foundation underpins hybrid cloud. And by that what I mean is that things like having a consistent operating system, consistent runtime, APIs, all of these things ultimately tied together across your fleet which is what gives you that capability to write once and deploy anywhere. You'll keep hearing that from Red Hat. Write once, deploy anywhere. That is true hybrid. Security. Now, a lot has been said about it, and a lot will continue to be said for good reason. Remember, we mentioned Annie. Annie is giving all of her information to you. You need to be able to handle that in a secure manner. So what are we doing about it? When we talk to customers who are successful in hybrid cloud and they look at security, and this is a lot of the security teams that I sometimes interact with, the guys in the room, and I apologize to the security guys, the guys in the room who will sit like this at the back and just look at you and not give you anything, and you go, like, what's going on, So it's those guys who really like this kind of stuff, right? Where Red Hat is really working in a holistic manner, and what do I mean by that? Things like design. When we're designing our products, are we ensuring that they are compliant right from the get-go? If you think about security standards, all of that stuff is written in a nice document somewhere. I doubt very many of those people who have actually written those security compliance statements have actually written any code. Right? That's where people like Red Hat come in. Right? Folks like us come in who will come and convert that into actually what the code looks like from a hardened point of view. So right from the get-go, design, so that when you get it, you've got 80% of your security compliance requirements already ticked off. You just focus on the 20% which is applicable to your environment. Right? We've done part of the heavy lifting for you. Things like build, right? So providing developers things like a signed container image so that you're not just pulling something from Docker Hub and using it and you don't know, what's lurking underneath the hood over there, right? Things like the platforms on which you run your applications. So, really baking in things like SVIRT, SE Linux, SEC when it comes to OpenShift, these kinds of things, turning them on and keeping them on and baking that into the product. To manage and to automate compliance, so compliance on an ongoing basis, you would have probably heard about it in some of the other sessions today, where you use things like Ansible and Satellite to actually make sure that you're continuously running playbooks that achieve compliance. What that means is you're not just doing it once and forgetting about it. There's something that could be running every 10 minutes if you wanted to ensure that all of your compliance requirements are met. And finally, adapt. Things change, new vulnerabilities come out. That's when Red Hat comes in and helps customers as well with new capabilities and new playbooks, right? The last part, or the last key, is managing the hybrid cloud. Now, last year, when I was at Forum, I talked about the single pane of glass becoming the single glass of pain, right? Because everybody's trying to do everything in this single pane of glass, right? This is so complicated, and it's just so many different workflows, and there are customers who are doing that and doing that successfully. APIs move, cloud providers move. People do it. They do it really well. If you're doing it well, go for it, right? You know what you're doing. But it tends to become complex, it tends to become heavy, and ultimately it tends to become expensive. So what we've done is we've said, okay, customers are saying, set a different approach. Can we do something a little bit differently? And I want to give you two examples here on how we're doing that, how we're trying to solve that problem. So the first one is, you've probably seen cloud.redhat.com mention, where you can see things like insights, cloud management services. So this is a hosted SaaS model. So if you look at the cloud management services for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that is the kind of scaled-down version of Satellite, where you don't have to have Satellite running in your environment. You could have some of the functionality available as a SaaS offering directly over here. So Red Hat is doing that deployment and lifecycle management for you, and you connect back your Red Hat Enterprise Linux fleet into that, into that widget. Things like OpenShift Cluster Manager, where you are able to manage all of your OpenShift clusters centrally from one particular place. Right? There are a couple of new things which you can see as tech preview coming down the line as well, and you'll see announcements about it, things like Ansible Automation Platform, the plugin for that as well. Now, the second thing that we're helping customers on that whole management piece is, if you look at OpenShift Cluster, and I just want to drill down a bit further on that particular piece, is this concept of the connected customer experience, which is something that we've recently announced. We're testing this heavily in North America with a number of customers, and it's working really well. What that is if you look at it traditionally, the model where you, the customer, are on the top, you have an OpenShift cluster, and you're kind of managing that cluster by yourself, And I already told you that you could use cloud.redhat.com to gain some visibility into what that cluster or multiple clusters look like. When something breaks or something doesn't work, you typically raise a support ticket, and somebody from our customer experience and engagement team, CEE or support services, will log in and help you troubleshoot that problem. What we've done is we've deployed an OpenShift operator, which is like a connected customer operator, if you will. And what that does is, and this, by the way, is completely optional, so it's an opt-in model. It's up to you if you want to do it, if you see value. What that does is that connects you directly into our CEE team, and that gives the CEE team visibility of multiple hundreds of clusters running across the world. And what that does is that allows things like proactive remediation, anomaly detection, configuration tuning, things that are kind of day-to-day bread and butter stuff for that CE engineer, which is probably not for you. So somebody is there sitting in the background, kind of watching your back and giving you a hand in terms of helping you to manage your OpenShift deployment. We've got plenty of examples of customers getting calls from someone at Red Hat saying, hey, I think you should take a look at this because I think you're going to hit a problem. And they're like, what? Who's this? Like, what's going on? How do you have access to this information? And then we explain to them, as part of the opt-in model, we're working towards you. And they're really, really happy with the outcome because that has potentially avoided, an outage. So that's kind of the 5 keys, that we discussed. And the question is, well, how does Red Hat fit in? Now, if you look at it, there's kind of the 4 main things that people tend to more or less know Red Hat for. Obviously, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Obviously, we're an an open source company. We, demonstrate leadership in this area. We have very strong enterprise security credentials, even though we're not a security company. And we have a hybrid cloud portfolio, which means all of our products have been designed specifically over the last few years around the hybrid cloud story. But one thing that people, kind of don't know about or know less about is our people and our culture. I encourage you to speak to any Red Hatter over here, and I can guarantee you in the first couple of minutes, if you ask them, what is it like working at Red Hat? The people and the culture aspect will immediately come up. It's a great bunch of people. There's a really good working culture, and that's something what we have made a conscious decision is to bring it to our customers as well. So things like the D0500, the DevOps Culture and Practice Enablement Workshop, where you can get people from Red Hat to come in and work with you as a consultancy, and you can do things like design sprints where you can get the real end user experience, the kind of the Annie-centric outcome. And there is the Open Innovation Labs booth outside. So if you want to know more about this, come talk to the people over there. So in summary, and just to clear, and I know I've just got 30 seconds left. So we spoke about the 5 keys, to success with hybrid cloud, right? Choice of cloud, multiple strategies for applications, workload portability, security, and management of hybrid cloud. So I kind of ran through a number of different aspects to get you thinking, how have you got this covered as part of your deployment? But remember, it's all about Annie. Ultimately, we started off with Annie, and I want to close with Annie. Annie is your ultimate end user. What we need to be able to do is help you innovate faster so that you can bring new products and services to Annie. You can deliver these faster, both existing as well as new, in a more secure manner. And you're able to adapt to Annie's changing requirements faster. So hybrid cloud is that tool that helps you ultimately get that experience for Annie. If some of the stuff resonated with you and you would like to understand more or talk more, that's my email address again over there. There's the Red Hat hybrid cloud infrastructure URL. You can just use your favorite search engine to find more information. We can do things like arrange a one-day workshop where people from Red Hat can come in and talk to you and work with your teams and really get the use cases out. Or we can just talk about this at the booth, or drop me an email, and we're happy to help out as best as we can. But with that, thank you very much for your attention, and have a wonderful Red Hat forum.